My name's Scott Gallo. I teach at NYU and I appreciate your time. We have 170 slides and 3,600 questions, 3,600 seconds, so let's light this candle. Okay, we're going to talk about COVID as an accelerant more than a change agent. We're going to look at COVID-19's impacts through the lens of the four: Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. To understand these companies is to understand retail, e-commerce, our economy, media. We have some very unhealthy trends that I believe are taking our economy from a dysfunctional economy to a dystopian economy. And then we're going to wrap up and talk about what we believe is the real profound opportunity coming out of COVID-19. Decades and days. Vladimir Lenin has a great quote: decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. I think we're in the latter. We've seen literally the future being pulled forward. So the first lesson, or the first actionable item across COVID-19, is to take the 3 or 4 biggest trends in your sector or specific to your company, take the slope of that trajectory out 10 years, extend it 10 years, and ask yourself, are your consumers, the capital markets, the costs around your company, where they would be in 10 years? And I would argue that in many cases they are, and that you need to respond and assume that that is the present day. So a little bit about the tragedy that is COVID-19. We're coming up on about 250,000 deaths here in the United States. Or put another way, we have lost almost 2.5 times, or now 2 times, as many people as we lost in World War I. We have lost approximately the same number of people just in April, just in 1 month from COVID-19, as we lost in the entire Vietnam conflict. 8 months of World War II deaths just in 1 month, the number of Americans who perished in April of 2019. In Iraq, we lost 1/13 the number of people we lost from COVID-19 in April of this year. Again, this is just 1 month. This is just April. And in April, we lost the equivalent of 19 September 11th mortality or deaths of American citizens. The deaths per day of this crisis exceed any crisis in previous history. In other words, this crisis is unprecedented if you think about the velocity of death. We have never experienced this type of mortality or the cadence or the projectile of death, disease, and disability that we're experiencing with COVID-19. If there's one chart that sort of embodies what is happening from an economic level or professional level or trends level, it's this chart. And I got this from Derek Thompson at The Atlantic. Loosely speaking, e-commerce started to gain traction in 2000. And every year since then, it's increased its share of total retail approximately 1%. And standing here in March of 2020, we were at 18% of retail was conducted through digital channels. Within 8 weeks, that popped to 28%. We literally had a decade of progress or of growth of e-commerce pulled forward in 8 weeks, and it's unlikely to go back. So we literally had 10 years acceleration in 8 weeks. And it's happening all across the economy. We've had 6 years of acceleration in online grocery delivery. We've had Walmart jump their sales 4 years. If their sales were growing, the company was doing very well, but it leapt forward to the growth that they were expecting in 4 years. The number of people working from home has been accelerated by a decade. Again, this isn't a new trend. More and more people were taking advantage of remote technologies and working from home, but this has leapt forward again a decade. The number of young adults living at home, especially men, this was a trend again that was continuing to rise, but it has accelerated dramatically, and we now have an acceleration of a decade, and now more young people, more young adults 18 to 30 live at home than live outside of the home. Bad for everybody. The stock market, same story. We've had decades of a decline or a decade-like decline, and then a decade-like reflation or re-acceleration just in a matter of weeks. We again look at the IPO market, and we're seeing a dramatic acceleration. There's a bit of an imbalance. Entire swaths of the economy have been precluded, prohibited, locked out of the IPO market. There are no travel. There really aren't any media. There aren't any hospitality companies. There aren't very many consumer brands that have access to the public markets right now because of the exogenous shock of COVID-19. At the same time, the institutional investors who buy IPOs have never had it better. Their stocks are up, they have more money to deploy, but they have fewer IPOs, fewer supply. A demand supply imbalance, that means if you can get through that crowded door, you're likely to experience a dramatic increase in first day pop or first 90 days pop of your equity. So we have a ton of market reaction where everyone's trying to come up with just add water IPOs, better known as SPACs. And we've seen a record year for special purchase acquisition cores, which what I would call just add water IPOs that kind of skip the traditional diligence process. Now, why is this happening? Why has there been sort of this sugar high, if you will, or this K-shaped recovery? We have tremendous stimulus being pumped into the economy. If we were to look at the expenditures of the last 4 months of the US government, those are the expenditures we projected from the US government in 22 years. That will likely come down, or at least we hope it will come down. But as we sit here now, we are spending, the government is spending or on an expenditure level where we were supposed to be in almost a quarter century from now. I would argue, and I've said this publicly, that the stimulus is nothing but an attempt to flatten the curve for rich people. There'll be a lot of well-publicized examples of people who absolutely need unemployment extended. There'll be a lot of commercials around the woman who owns the cupcake bakery who got to hold on to her jobs and come out the other end. 2/3 of this, I think, plus has done nothing but flatten the curve for people who don't need this stimulus. We have decided that the most important thing in our economy, it'd be bad if 1 million people lost their lives, but it'd be profound, it'd be tragic if the NASDAQ went out. So the stimulus is mostly about putting money in the hands of upper middle income and wealthy small business people, and also young men in their basements on Robinhood who can pump and pop the stock market. We saw record savings rate during this crisis. Think about that. A crisis that recalls all of us in World War II, we didn't get money from the government. We were asked to buy war bonds. And this stimulus, the bitch citizenship that is now the US, demands money to bail them out. And as a result, we have put too much stimulus out there that is totally misguided, and the savings rate has never been greater. That's right, the midst of a pandemic, and Americans are saving 2 and 3 times what they were saving pre-pandemic. Where is this going? It's going to online trading. We're seeing an absolute explosion in the number of accounts across online trading, best typified by Robinhood, who on a risk-adjusted basis or a size-adjusted basis trades 8 times the number of shares or something like 48 times the number of options. Where do they put that money? Do they have time to do diligence? Are they investing for the long term? They're not investing, they're trading, and they're drawn to story stocks, and that is companies that have a lot of publicity, that CNBC has fallen in love with, that the marketplace knows is going to do well in terms of the underlying business, and it has taken the equity value of these companies to just unprecedented levels. We have, if you will, the companies that get a ton of press and are seen as ground zero or the epicenter benefiting from COVID-19 have risen dramatically. In this case, Amazon, Apple, Tesla, and Teladoc could best be described as story stocks, meaning that the underlying fundamentals have totally disarticulated from the value of the company. It's about the story, it's not about the fundamentals. You wanna know what Tesla stock is gonna do tomorrow? You wanna know what Tesla stock is gonna do tomorrow? Then just find out how many Robinhood accounts were open today. This data, in a word, is gorgeous. You never see data sets like this. These are the number of new accounts open to Robinhood and Tesla's stock price. And as you can see, there is a direct correlation. So what is happening? People are getting stimulus checks they don't need. They're going into their parents' basements, they're firing up Robinhood, and they're buying Tesla. And we've seen a year in weeks with respect to certain story stocks. It took Apple $1 trillion. It took Apple 42 years to get to $1 trillion. It then went to $1 trillion in 2 years. It also went from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. From the March lows to the August highs, it went from $1 trillion to $2 trillion in just 5 months. 42 years to get to $1 trillion, 5 months to go from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Apple is now worth more than the 100 biggest companies in the UK, and we've seen Tesla's share price in 5 months, go up somewhere between 300% and 400%. The beginning of the crisis, Tesla was worth $123 billion. It was the 3rd or the 4th most valuable automobile company behind Toyota, Volkswagen, Daimler. Fast forward post-COVID, just 5 months, and boom, it is now number 1, and it's not only the most valuable automobile company in the world, it's worth more than the numbers 2, 3, and 4 combined. So think of it another way. This is a company that produced almost 400,000 cars last year versus about 25 million automobiles across the other 3, but the one that's produced 400,000 cars is now worth more, meaning the market is valuing each car Tesla produces at about $950,000 per car in market capitalization versus somewhere between 8 and 25 for the other. Let's talk about the 4. As you get older, you become more like yourself. Supposedly, these stocks were supposed to do bad in times of recession. Everyone said that the tech will outperform the market in a bull economy, but it'll do poorly in a bad economy. Well, guess what? Heads they win, tails they rock the house. The S&P 500 is becoming the S&P 7, and that is a smaller number of stocks are accounting for a greater and greater share of these indices. These indices aren't as much a proxy on the health of America. They're essentially an indicator of how these stocks, big tech is doing, and also how the top 10% of America are doing, who own the majority of stocks. These companies have boomed, do even better in bad times than they do in good times. If you owned $100 of the four at the beginning of the year, post-pandemic, you're up about 42, 43% as we sit here today. These companies have dramatically outperformed the market. There's a tale of two worlds. There's the stock market, and then there is big tech. Also, who else does well? Companies that are too big to fail. The marketplace has decided there are two types of stocks you want to own. One, unregulated monopolies, specifically big tech. Two, companies that are too big to fail. Airlines. Why? For some reason, we associate patriotism with Delta and American. Fuck that. They should go out of business like every other company that can't pay their bills right now. Airlines have restructured their debt 66 times since 2000. They are used to doing this. But for some reason, we've decided that if you're a big company, Uncle Sam should step in and bail you out. The market perceives this asymmetry of risk and loves those stocks because they get to privatize the gains and pay their CEOs tens of millions of dollars and reward their shareholders. But if it goes down, we don't let it go to zero and let the debt holders take over the planes. We decide to bail them out because they're American and they're big companies and they employ a lot of people. This is a huge mistake. The marketplace recognizes this and has basically said, if you're big, you have a better shareholder return. Look at this data. Look at this data. The 10 biggest companies in the S&P 500 are up an average of 10%. The smallest 50 companies in the S&P 500 are down an average of 39%, and the ones in the middle, it literally staggers perfectly up based on size. A lot of big tech thought Corona would be an opportunity for redemption. Unfortunately, people are becoming more comfortable or have better visibility into the corruption that is Facebook, that Mark Zuckerberg has now become one of the most successful oligarchs in the world, leveraging his proximity to power to line his own pocket. Why would he continue to take political advertising despite the fact that it's obvious we continue to be weaponized, or these platforms continue to be weaponized by bad actors? Because they do $420 million in advertising. They trade at a multiple of 10. That's about $4 billion. The Zuck owns about 29% of the outstanding stocks. So political advertising is to Zuck worth about $1.2 billion. Mark Zuckerberg would absolutely pervert our democracy, erode a woman's rights for a lot less money than that. This is just pure math. But then he and his wife decide to donate $300 million for election interference. This is equivalent to Pablo Escobar building parks or Jeffrey Epstein opening a female youth counseling center. It's hypocritical. It's lipstick on cancer. The other unholy alliance here is Palantir's Peter Thiel and Donald Trump. Thiel recognizes that Trump is likely going to lose the election and has decided all of a sudden that he doesn't like Trump. And we're seeing Palantir stock performance start to erode. If Biden is elected, look for Palantir stock to be cut in half. This is the Rudy Giuliani of technology companies. It makes absolutely no sense. A libertarian who believes in small government and individual liberties, unless, of course, he is making government bigger by taking money to surveil our citizens and immigrants. We're the non-tech tech company. How can we prove it? We moved to Denver. I'm a socialist CEO. I'm going to pay me and my staff $45 million, but I'm a socialist. This company makes absolutely no sense, creates a lot of sideshows. Why? Such that I'll talk about the craziness and hypocritical nature of everything about this company to mask a central theme. This is a shitty business. They lost $500 million on $750 million in revenues. It took Google 3 years, Facebook 5 years, Amazon 7 years to become profitable. Palantir can see an R-rated movie with its parents' permission or join the army with its parental consent. It's been around 17 years, has raised and deployed $3.5 billion, and has never been able to turn a profit. This is a terrible fucking business. It's more like Accenture, except it's not profitable. Accenture trades at 3 to 4 times revenues, valuing Palantir optimistically at $3 to $4 billion, or approximately an 80% decline from where it is now. Look out below. The other very thoughtful people who are totally fucking up our country, who are the new lipstick on cancer, Jack Dorsey, who speaks in slow, thoughtful, earnest tones and takes silent retreats and has a nose ring and has created a rage machine that is tearing at the fabric of America and is not interested in doing anything to address these issues, except maybe moving to Africa and talking Bitcoin so he can take the 89% of his wealth that's tied up in his afternoon job. The only co-CEO in the S&P 500, an absolute ridiculous reflection on the board of Twitter, who have been grossly negligent, letting a part-time CEO who has done nothing to address this underlying ripping of a fabric of our society. Sheryl Sandberg, right? Lean in. Well, here we go. Her platform was weaponized in 2016. It looks as if we have an illegitimate president. Americans don't like to think that. It is easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled. We don't like the notion of the truth that the object of our affection, Facebook, was detonated in our face by bad actors, and we have an illegitimate president who is putting people on the Supreme Court who will ultimately, likely, turn back a woman's right to choose. Sheryl Sandberg is the worst thing to happen to women in the last several decades. From bad to better, who has a lot tied up in Trump's reelection other than Peter Thiel? Jack Dorsey. Look at where the Twitter stock price was when Trump was elected. Look what's happened since he was elected. Trump is the best thing that's happened towards Twitter. It's likely Trump may end up in prison or at a minimum broke, but Jack Dorsey will be worth a lot less money if Biden is elected. Is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that Jeff Bezos' wife announces a $1.6 billion donation the day before the big tech hearings? Aren't we nice? Doesn't our value create a lot of value? And the hearings are the day before their earnings announcements. Why? Because then they can say, oh my gosh, we have competitors everywhere. It is so hard to be Apple. It's even harder to be Amazon. Competitors everywhere. Look at us. I don't know what to do. Except have record earnings the next day within 15 minutes of the close of the market, the day after the hearings. When they announce their earnings, these companies gain the market capitalization of Pinterest, IPG, WP, Omnicom, Publicis, and AT&T. That is the market capitalization they added in the 15 minutes post the earnings call the day after the earnings. None of this was by accident. Amazon is the antichrist of retail. When Amazon goes up, the rest of retail goes down because people have figured out it's sucking the oxygen out of the room. Retail sales are flat, but one company continues to grow and use anti-competitive practices and dumping to soak the oxygen out of the room. Amazon is up 6x just in the last 5 years. The rest of retail has gotten kicked in the gut over and over. The Stimulus Act might as well have been called the Full Shareholder Act for Walmart and Amazon. Imagine, if you will, what they would do to pump their stock prices 30 or 60%. I know, let's put massive stimulus in the hands of Americans because we are the primary beneficiaries of additional capital. But wait, that's not enough. I know, let's federally mandate the closure of 98% of our competition. So if I want a boogie board, sunblock, and a beach chair, I can't get it at the surf shop, I have to go to Walmart or Amazon. Not to say that they planned this, but they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams anything more. Essential companies are seeing huge online surge and in-store surge, taking their stock price really up. We have a K-shaped recovery where there's a few small winners. It's a larger metaphor for our society and a lot of very, very big losers. Our K-shaped recovery is best embodied by what's happened in retail, where Amazon is basically now worth the rest of retail in the US and Europe. That's right, Amazon is now worth the rest of retail in the US and in Europe. And we're seeing certain industries do okay, specifically tech, anything around remote, anything digital, and traditional industries more dependent upon the consumption of the product, standing shoulder to shoulder. Travel, hospitality, restaurants, this business, education are getting hit very hard. The most valuable company in 2025 will be a recently spun AWS when Bezos prophylactically decides to break himself up when he hears the wolves at the door. When I spend time in DC talking to elected representatives, I don't really go over my themes. They get it. They understand that big tech should be broken up. What I talk mostly about is the scale of what's going on. People don't really understand the scale of the wealth and the value creation or destruction here. So let's talk about Jeff Bezos, who is experiencing the mother of all midlife crises. How do I know? Because I'm in the midst of one. That's the bad news. The good news is I think I'm going to grow out of it in about 20 or 30 years. But imagine Bezos really wants to let his peacock feathers fly, my brother. Fly. I know. I need new threads. Well, that's fine. I'll buy Ralph Lauren, Nordstrom. This is what Jeff Bezos could buy for cash here and now. He could buy Ralph Lauren and Nordstrom to look kind of hot. I know. I like to roll in my new threads. I want a Ferrari. Well, Ferrari's a little blingy, so I'll also buy Land Rover and Jaguar to dial it down a little bit. But what if I need to go somewhere? I want a Global Express, the new one they can get from here to Sydney. I'm not just going to buy a Global. I'm going to buy the company that makes them, Bombardier. I need a fat office. Well, better yet, I need a man cave. I need a real man cave. Enough of that textile factory shit. I'm going large. I'm going to buy the Pan Am, i.e. MetLife building, and turn it into my man cave. How do I stay so jacked? I bought Equinox and I purchased testosterone therapy from the company that also makes erectile dysfunction drugs, Hims. If I'm jacked and this rich, I need some protection. What do? I'm going to fund the entire defense budget of Israel for a year. That way I can borrow the Mossad. I get bored on weekends. I like basketball, so I'm going to buy every basketball team in the NBA, maybe dress it up a little, buy a Boss. I'm on a Panorama Cartier, so I'm going to buy Richemont, the largest watch company in the world. I like to go to movies. I'm going to go to one that didn't go out of business, AMC. And occasionally I like to send my parents away with my kids, so I'm going to buy Carnival Cruise Lines. Oh, and by the way, I have enough money left over to buy Nordstrom's, Williams-Sonoma in case I get into cooking, or Victoria's Secret for when, the limited brands for if and when I get that girlfriend. Jeff Bezos now has more wealth than every person in Alaska, Wyoming, Vermont, DC. I'm out of breath. What is Amazon's big challenge? They're running into the law of big numbers. They need to add $250 billion in top line revenue to grow under their stock price. That means all roads lead to one place for Amazon. That is healthcare. You can't feed a city hunting squirrels. They have to go big game hunting. There's a small number of industries that they can actually find the carcass big enough to feed off of. And I think all of them lead to one place, and that is 70% of the US economy, and that is healthcare. We're seeing, loosely speaking, the biggest trend in COVID-19 is what I would call the Great Dispersion. And that is 99% of our populace will have contracted, endured, and developed the antibodies from the novel coronavirus without having entered a doctor's office, much less a hospital. Regulations are being torn down. There's a massive amount of investment, and we're going to see 17% of the US economy up for grabs. As a result, anything around remote medicine or telemedicine is taking off, and we're seeing private equity and venture capital pile money into the space, which will create unbelievable innovation. We're going to see more money invested in remote medicine in the next 24 months than we've seen in the last 24 years. Unfortunately, I think the company best positioned to take advantage of this is the one that knows your body mass index, the food you eat, how old you are, the zip code you're in, how much money you make, whether you're in a monogamous relationship, all the indicators, all the signals for health, and that's Amazon. And they're going to start collecting more data with their halo such that they can help you with your lifestyle, maybe preemptive primary care that all involve products and purchases. The next big unlock, well, what have been the last big unlocks? The biggest unlocks of shareholder value of the last 30 years in business have been, one, Apple's irrational decision to take money out of broadcast advertising and put it into 550 temples to the brand called stores. And then Amazon deciding to get out of a transactional business and go to a monogamous business relationship with 82% of American households, more households than voted in the 2016 election, decorate a Christmas tree, own a gun, or go to church. I think those last two groups are the same people, in the form of Amazon Prime, taking their multiple on EBITDA, which wasn't a lot, to a multiple on revenues. The third big unlock was Walmart's decision to stop looking at their stores as liabilities but assets, and to not tax people with the in-store experience. Let's be honest, is the freak show that is America, and it is freaky, and give them the great grocery they have. Their grocery is fantastic. The in-store experience, not so much. So click and collect is all of the great taste, with none of the calories of the in-store experience. What's the fourth unlock? What's number quattro? What's the fourth unlock? It happened a few months ago when Amazon told the shareholders, or Bezos told his shareholders, you may want to take a seat, and said that he was going to reinvest all of the operating profit back into new workers, new protocols, and additional compensation to create the Earth's first vaccinated supply chain. You may think, well, that's temporary. We're going to get a vaccine. Take every projection, every prediction around the timing, around when the novel coronavirus is supposed to end, when we're supposed to get a vaccine, when it's supposed to be distributed, and triple it. Our flaw as a species, or one of our many flaws as a species other than we're tribal, is that we have a terrible ability to approximate time, or specifically the cadence of time, and it always goes faster than we think. Did any of us think we'd be here right now? Did anyone think that we'd be coming up on year end with no vaccine, flare-ups in Europe, more flare-ups? In my home state, Florida, we are losing more people every day than in all of Germany, and many days all of Europe. Did anyone think we'd actually be here? This is only the beginning of the vaccinated supply chains, accretion of wealth, since announcing that Amazon was going to be the only place where if you're a supplier, a vendor, a manufacturer, a customer, a delivery person, well, there's one place that's COVID or near COVID free, and that is the Amazon supply chain. And by the way, they're the only vertical supply chain that can pull shit off the site if it's not COVID friendly, can deliver it, can take it back, have the delivery trucks. They're the only one that's vertical, that owns everything from A to Z. No one else can do this. They're the only ones with the capital and the leadership to do it. And since announcing their vaccinated supply chain, they have added, again, they've just added the value of FedEx, UPS, Colgate, and DHL. There is another. Shopify is arguably the most innovative company in North America. They have added or created the value of FedEx, Simon, and Nordstrom by being the non-Amazon Amazon, saying, no, Amazon partners with a retailer the way a virus partners with a host. We'll let you keep your data. We'll let you keep the packaging. We'll let you keep custody of the consumer. And they have hugely benefited. Shopify has kind of filled the space that RIM vacated. It's nice to see the Canadians, who must believe they're living above a meth lab at this point, do so well. Shopify is a very interesting company, arguably the most innovative company of the last decade. Facebook and Google. Facebook and Google. They had 60 cents on the digital dollar going into COVID-19. We saw traditional media boom because of everyone's interest in information, but we saw ad spending plummet. We're seeing ad spending accelerate across the ones that we're already losing, right? We knew this was going to happen. We just didn't know it was going to happen this fast. Even the digital stuff has slowed down, but it's still growing. So what are we going to see? We're going to see Facebook and Google make a recovery to 80 cents on the dollar. They're going to experience the type of recovery everyone's hoping America has. They have enough cash on hand to buy Boeing and Airbus for cash, whereas everybody else has to start furloughing, laying off people, and playing defense. They're going to, and already have really had a V-shaped recovery. America's hoping for an L. I think it's going to look more like a chair. And we're seeing incredible bifurcation in year-on-year revenues. How do you know if a media company is going to survive? You think, well, it's digital versus analog. No, that's a rookie move. Don't be a rookie. That's a rookie move. The primary indicator, the primary signal for the life expectancy of a media company is simple: the percentage of revenues they get from subscription. What's the most bulletproof media company in the world right now? New York Times. Over 2/3 of its revenue from subscriptions, which tend to not bump down in economic times. Whereas with advertising, those pesky brands and media planners just turn it off when they don't have a lot of money, or they're insecure, they're worried about the future. So a lot of old and new media companies that are 100% dependent on advertising, ranging from Vox to Vice to BuzzFeed, are in real trouble. The novel coronavirus has said that subscriptions are the way to go. We correlated companies that get the majority of their revenue, or looked at the percentage of revenue they get from subscription. And what do you know? Since January 1st, the percentage of revenues you get from subscription is correlated to your stock performance. So this is kind of another big learning here. And that is, every company needs to be thinking about, how do we get out of a transactional business model into a recurring revenue bundle, a rundle. And even if your business doesn't lend itself well to it, if you can just get 1% of your revenues, and the key is that that part of your business is growing faster than the rest of part of your business, the markets might recast your company and start giving you a greater multiple on revenues. Panera Bread, $8.95 unlimited coffee. They've signed up almost 1 million people. That's $100 million a year in recurring revenue. That recurring revenue stream is worth $500 million to $1 billion. They would need to build more restaurants to perhaps do about $500 million in revenues to get to the same level of market change. How can you double your market capitalization with no increase in revenues, maybe even a decrease in revenues? Wouldn't that be nice? My top line goes down, but my value goes up. Boom, subscription recurring revenue bundle. Look at the companies that have moved to a rundle, right? Amazon's increased their revenue 40%, but their stock price is up 86%. Microsoft's only increased its revenue 13%, but it's up 50%. Restoration Hardware, that does 95% of the gross merchandise volume through the Restoration Hardware membership program, their stock's up 134%, even though their revenues have declined 19%. And then let's look at Peloton, whose revenues are up dramatically, 170%, but still their stock price is up almost five-fold. This is the gangster move, recurring revenue bundles. And then the other companies that are totally dependent upon advertising are on ventilators. The mortality rate in the novel coronavirus is somewhere between 0.1% and 4%, depending on the region, how you're measured, what you consider the denominator. The mortality rate across media firms will likely be somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 firms. There is a duopoly. It's called Facebook and Google, and it's going to 4 and 5 cents on the dollar. Let's talk about Apple. Apple has totally been recast with absolutely no increase in earnings. The stock price has doubled. Let me repeat that. With no increase in earnings or growth, the stock price has doubled. Why? Again, it's been recast. It's been recast as a recurring revenue company. It's taken its recurring revenues in just 4 short years. It's doubled them from 11% to 22%, and it continues to accelerate. I'm not going to pelt you with my voice here. Even their bundle, they have such a strong brand. I would call this the meh bundle, right? It's a bunch of kind of bad news bears apps, right? It's the leftovers. Soon though, if Apple wants to grow into that ridiculous multiple or even expand its share price. I've owned Apple for 11 years, and for the first time, I'm actually contemplating selling it because it traditionally trades at 15 times earnings and it's trading at 38. Gosh, look out below. All they need to do is add this, right? Good bundles have a couple things in common. One, they're not choices, they're IQ tests. You don't decide to have Netflix. It means you have an IQ over 70. If you have a credit card, you have Amazon Prime. The way they make this an IQ test is they say that every time the iPhone comes out, every time new AirPods come out, every time there's a new iPad for your kid, we're going to send it to you 3 months before anybody else. Free screenings, educational events in the stores, 20, 40, 60, $100 a month. Take the wealthy elite around the globe that all want to say, I have better genes, I think different, have sex with me, and say that we are going to take choice out of the equation. What's the biggest mistake? The biggest mistake marketers make, they think of choice as a good thing. No, it's not. Consumers want less choice. They just want to be more confident in the choices presented to them. And that is the basic primary value proposition of a recurring revenue bundle. Apple is moving towards it. It needs to get bolder, and it needs to include their core asset. And the second key feature of a recurring revenue bundle is it enhances the core offering. Amazon Prime with 2-day delivery enhances the core offering. Right now, Apple One doesn't enhance the core offering because this is the core offering. Anyway, Apple may also launch a search engine. A third key feature of the companies adding hundreds of billions of shareholder value is they are vertical. There's no reason for Apple not to leverage the fact they have the wealthiest people trapped on their rails, so they're going to start guiding them to their search engine. On announcement of this, that they were thinking about a search engine, which I predicted in December of 2019. Thank you. I only point this stuff out because I'm rabidly insecure. They added $150 billion in additional market value. Their challenge, same as Amazon's, their top line number is so huge. They too need to add $250 billion. Where do they go? I think they go to my business, and that is education, which has become a caste system that is drunk on luxury and are no longer public servants, but with a mix of arrogance and self-aggrandizement, have totally lost the script and facilitated a transfer of wealth of $1.5 trillion from middle-class homes to the pockets of tenured faculty and university administrators. We're also seeing a dispersion here. We're recognizing that, in fact, education doesn't have to be delivered through the supply constraints of what's called a university. If you just take 50% of classes online, you effectively double the capacity. You double the capacity or the supply of universities. We're seeing huge shifts, huge interest in online education. Why? Because my business is unsustainable. Tonight, I am teaching 280 kids brand strategy. I'm doing this for 3 hours. I do it for 12 nights. They pay me or $7,000. Granted, my agent takes a 98% commission. That's $1.96 million, or approximately $163,000 a night. That is just not sustainable. I'm good at what I do. Some nights I'm even great. I am not worth that. And that $1.96 million is in the form of debt that delays household formation, that delays people having kids, that delays people taking risks on new businesses. It's bad for the economy. It's morally bankrupt. Education is a function of certification times the education plus experience over the tuition. These folks think they're in the midst of radical cost cutting. They have absolutely no idea what cost cutting means. They have made these strident, wrap themselves in the flag statements about the need to reopen, that they have a national priority to open, says the head of Brown University. No, you have a national priority to stop the fucking pandemic and not bring super spreaders into a very dense area, infect them, and then send them home. Granted, some universities have done an outstanding job with testing and tracing to really limit the spread of the novel coronavirus and should serve as role models. But on the whole, this just was not worth the risk. Of the 100 metros in the US where over 10% of their population is college students, last week saw their greatest levels of outbreak since August 1. We're seeing this all over university campuses. We have basically the new super spreaders. The first super spreaders were Republican red state governors who reopened too fast or refused to close. The new super spreaders are blue state or very blue city, blue organization, university chancellors who have prioritized their own financial well-being and their own endowments over the health of the Commonwealth. We have seen, and we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more tragedy, mostly second order, mostly students infecting pop or mom or grandma. I think this is a crisis for higher ed, and I don't think it could happen at a better time. We're going to see big demand destruction. For the first time, people are really seriously considering the value of a four-year university. There'll be a flight to quality, just as there's been in every other industry. The bigger are going to get bigger here. The best brands are going to have more and more demand, and they'll have the scale. And if they're smart, they'll use a mix of big and small tech to increase their supply and lower their costs and consolidate the market. Google has a plan to disrupt this with their $300 6-month certificate. We'll see if it's just PR, if it's real, but it is exciting. What's most exciting is that Google, which is probably the most aspirational employer in the world, has said that people who graduate from it will be considered for a job within Google in those specific domains at a salary that assumes they have a bachelor's degree. From dysfunction to dystopian, we have lost the script around the algebra of disincentive. The best policeman, the best monitor of good activity is, in fact, the algebra of disincentive, and that is people understand in the back of their mind the likelihood that they might get caught if they commit a crime times the probability of the punishment, or the punishment has to be greater than the expected reward. Where is it working? Where does the algebra of disincentive work? Simple. If somebody gets a call right now and says, hey, for $250,000, I can get your kid who's into USC at a much better school, UCLA, for $250,000, it's likely that person hangs up the phone right now, because nobody wants to do a perp walk just so their kid can upgrade from USC to UCLA. That's just not worth it. Where it doesn't work is an online trading platform that is totally opaque about where and how it makes money and who's actually paying for this order flow and what it means in terms of end prices and commissions to the users. And they get fined $1 million. They continue to do it. They might get fined another 10 million, and they don't care. They don't care. Why? Because they have an $11 billion valuation and a $10 million potential fine from the SEC is the same as having a 25-cent parking ticket on a meter that costs $100 every 15 minutes. You decide that the smart thing is to break the law. Where have we seen this? The FTC writes an insurance policy to Facebook that indemnifies them against any wrongdoing up until that point for 1% of their market capitalization. Government has no longer become a countervailing force, but a co-conspirator, which is a key step to tyranny, or the cheapest insurance company in the world for big tech. We're seeing a K-shaped recovery. We're seeing incredible accretion of value of wealth across the top 1%. The same numbers have only gotten worse. We're seeing the net worth of people over the age of 65 explode 68%, whereas people under the age of 35, their net worth is down 25%. And what a shocker, they're protesting. Wouldn't you be pissed off? It's not as much rich versus poor as it is, I think, old versus young, who have co-opted government and decided that they want Social Security, they want lower taxes on their assets. And young people, well, you know what? Fuck you. We've basically the tide has gone out, and we've seen that 3/4 of Americans, of the 24%, the quarter of Americans that don't have $400 and the 2/3 of Americans that don't have 3 months saved are really vulnerable. The most wealthy nation in the history of mankind has incredible dispersion or bifurcation in our society. And we're seeing delinquency rates by property types skyrocket, and we're seeing the number of people or households that can't afford to feed their kids. Is 1 in 5 households that have children can't afford to feed their kids. Again, the wealthiest nation in history. And we're also seeing a tale of two countries. If you make over $100,000 a year, only 60% can work from home, and less than 10% have lost their jobs. It's now 0%. If you make less than $40,000, only 10% can work from home, and about 40% have lost their job. Where does this really impact society? Remote learning is a nuisance for college-age kids. A 19-year-old not returning for a sophomore year at Tulane is a nuisance. What's a tragedy is a 9-year-old stuck at home who, because her parent can't stay at home and monitor their online learning because they might not have access to broadband or even nutrition, is falling off the map in terms of, in this instance, math. Essentially, in public schools, we had people with different ethnicities largely tracking together. And that is totally bifurcated with remote learning. Beyond the moral problem here, it's just really stupid. That means we're 50% less likely to have new vaccines, new technologies, new ways to find mates or get in and out delivered to your home when we take half of America's youth and basically say, sorry, you're shit out of luck, and you're not going to keep up in terms of key domains in education. The K-shaped recovery continues to get more and more vicious. 21% increase in the NASDAQ, small business and unemployment revenues unemployment rate dramatically escalating. America's secret, we like to think, okay, we're doing okay because the NASDAQ and the market are all-time highs. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. The top 1% of American households have 80% of the stock. So all the NASDAQ is a proxy on the economic well-being of the top 1 or maybe the top 10%. And spoiler alert, they are killing it. It really is a tale of two cities. If you're wealthy, you're watching more Netflix, you're spending more time with your family, you've saved 5 to 10 hours a week in terms of commuting. And your wealth is at a record high because of those story stocks being traded and juiced up by those people trading Robinhood accounts. It has never been a better time to be in the top 10%. It's never been a worse time to be the rest, at least since the end of World War II. This is taking a huge impact and a bifurcation. That 10-year trend, we projected that in 10 to 20 years, China would overtake America as a superpower. Well, I think we're here. If you look at most indices around the reputation for China, China is now considered a more respected organization outside of the U.S. Than the United States. We're seeing their GDP has not only come back, but is ripping higher. That's kind of the unfair thing about crises, is that where they emerge is unimportant in terms of who gets impacted most. A subprime crisis can start in America and hurt Argentina more. And the virus, which did originate in China, doesn't seem to have hurt China to nearly the same extent as America, that has cemented this notion that American exceptionalism is a mix of incompetence and arrogance. Let's wrap up. We have had decades and days. We've seen the future be pulled forward. COVID-19, it's fun to talk about changes. Some rivers will reverse. Real estate, commercial real estate, enormous wave of commercial real estate going to move into residential. The building I first worked in, 1251 Avenue in the Americas at Morgan Stanley, it had on average 8,500 people a day in the building, and now has 500. It'll come back, but not to nearly the same extent. So we're spending 30% time less in an office and 30% time more in a home. Everyone from restoration hardware, stock, to lumber prices skyrocket. We're going to see a dramatic transfer in wealth across education. We're going to see dramatic increase in media subscription from theaters, which were just $7 billion in revenues. They've been going out of business forever. But in sum, all we're doing is pulling the future forward. The future looks like what we thought it was going to look like. We knew there were some very unhealthy underlying economic trends in our society. But again, it's gone from dysfunctional to dystopian. And we're going to have the mother of all income redistributions or really rethink through how we want to approach a society. When the wealthiest Americans are calling for higher taxes, it's not because they're especially principled or moral. It's because they recognize that when we get to these levels of income inequality throughout history, the good news is they always self-correct. When you get to a point where 12 families have more wealth in the Southern Hemisphere plus India, the Southern Hemisphere plus India figures out a way to double their wealth by taking the wealth of just 12 families away. It's fairly easy algebra. It's a fairly thoughtful, common sense strategy. And sometimes they get it by electing national leaders. Sometimes they get it by killing those people. It always self-corrects. That's the good news. The bad news is the mechanisms for self-correction are one of three things: war, famine, or revolution. And right now, if you think of pestilence as famine, we're 2 for 3. We've never seen this level of protest across America. We've never seen this level of pestilence or famine. We are 2 for 3 right now, and there's nothing to say it couldn't go 3 for 3. We have gone from a dysfunctional economy to a dystopian economy. What is the profound opportunity? What is the profound opportunity coming out of COVID-19? I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, and I'll come back to this. The first question is, are you in a position, because of technology, the kind of job you have, to work at full speed right now? If you're blessed with remote capabilities, if you're able to travel to Cabo San Lucas and rent a conference room and have a very talented VP of production, VP of tech, help you figure out a way to deliver stuff remotely, then you should be working at 120% capacity. NASCAR isn't one on the track, right? If you have good people who are figuring out your slides, figuring out how to acquire or get 8,000 people to show up for a live stream, if you have people who can make your presentation sing, if you have the ability to continue to work remotely, you should be working all the time. And the reason why is that races aren't won on the track. Races are won in the pits. And that is, if you can save 2 seconds in the pits, going 220 miles an hour, that's an eighth of a mile. That's hard to make up on the track. Races are won in the pits. So the variance, if you will, is extraordinary here. Jerry Rice, Hall of Fame receiver, San Francisco 49ers, was never the fastest person on the field, but he had the greatest acceleration and deceleration, meaning he got open more touchdown passes than any receiver in history. The variance here has dramatically expanded. There are some people who can't work. There are some people whose work product is impaired. And then there are people who can do as much or more work. If you're in that last group, be working all the time. This is really the time to turn on the jets and try and make extraordinary progress. The profound opportunity comes down to three questions. Is this the time to pivot from being a caretaker or a caretaker to a caregiver as it relates to your parents? Do you have the relationship with your siblings that you want? If you were forced to say goodbye to someone because of COVID-19 over FaceTime, do you have the relationship with them that you want right now? And finally, have you made the requisite investments in friendships and other relationships to ensure that they maintain their tensile strength? Have you let perceived slights or competitiveness or other bullshit get in the way of your friendships? We give medals to young men and women in uniform who demonstrate grace and courage during times of crisis. In other words, they put their own well-being on hold to try and help other people. This is a crisis. There are huge swaths of people that are struggling emotionally, psychologically, and financially. If you're in a position to help people you care about on either of those dimensions or any of those dimensions, and put your own needs aside because you're blessed with great health, you're blessed with people who love you, you're blessed with economic security, you can make the type of progress in weeks that can often take years. So the meaningful opportunity is to lap the competition professionally, but the profound opportunity is the investment in the repair and the cementing of key relationships. That is the profound opportunity to strengthen those relationships in weeks and what otherwise might take years. My name is Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU. I appreciate your time today. I wish you all good health, and we'll be back soon. Thanks very much, everybody.